Good morning everyone and welcome. Another little diary update, a little chit chat today. I'm not going to talk too much about the weight, it's going well, thank you very much. We'll do an update on that in a day or so. Today, over the last 24 hours, I've been watching some really interesting videos. One was the Queen's chef, and he was talking about various dishes, the Queen's favourite dishes and Prince Philip's favourite dishes.
It was difficult. It was difficult trying to put new dishes on all the time. She liked a favourite. It amazed me that we would send a great big chocolate cake up for her to have a meal at afternoon tea, and she would just take the tiniest slice and it would go back to the kitchen. If she wanted more, she would wait till next day, and when that cake came up again, I would have eaten it all.
And it was fascinating to watch. For me, just the history of the food and the way that they like to eat, it was fascinating. But I was also watching Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is a British politician who's now got a series on GB News, and it was lovely to watch. I mean, I really like Jacob Rees-Mogg, and that might divide me from some of you, but I like him. Yes, he's got an absolutely lovely plum voice and speaks absolutely perfectly, but he also almost feels like a gentrified version of the people, except for they're never quite. You know, when he talks about his sister Annunziata Rees-Mogg, and you think, oh dear me, you know, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, really. But another thing that came to mind when I was watching his first show, he was talking with a couple of people about fracking. Now, fracking's quite big news in Australia and the US and the UK at the moment. A lot of people talking about this method of getting gas out of the ground, or in some cases it brings out all sorts of other chemicals, and I'll go into that in a minute. But what was interesting is there were a couple of people sat opposite him, and one of them said, well, I wouldn't like fracking in my neighbourhood or at my back door. And Jacob Rees-Mogg said, well, I wouldn't mind fracking in my outside my front door, because of course the explosions or the tremors that are caused by fracking are so minor, they're no more than a coal fall in an empty coal mine.
I'm not sure I'd want someone fracking right outside my front door, for instance.
See, I wouldn't mind, because
you're convinced it's absolutely safe.
Absolutely, the seismic effect is less than a fall of rock in a disused coal mine.
And of course, he's right, but you know, there are some other things. If you understand fracking, and many of you may not understand even what fracking is, but it means when you drill down into the Earth's core, quite a few hundred meters, sometimes I think as much as a kilometre or so, down to a shale bed, and then they turn the angle of the drill so it goes into the shale bed, and then they force water down at a very, very high pressure, which cracks open the shale, and they put aggregate or sand down with this as well, so the sand will go into the gaps and keep those cracks open, and it will draw then the gases up to the surface. Along with it will come, of course, the shale, which is part of the Earth's crust and the geology of the land. It's sort of many millions of years old, some of these shale beds that they've discovered. It doesn't just have the gases, it'll have certain chemicals in there and metals and even radioactive materials, and a lot of that water then comes up to the Earth's surface, and one of the problems is getting rid of the waste products from fracking, as well as the potential damage. I don't know if you've ever done any glass cutting or tile cutting, but if you put a tiny line in the surface of glass and bend it over a stick or a solid object, it will snap right away along that little tiny weak line, and it's a tiny line in a very thick piece of glass that will just snap. So when you put these weaknesses in the earth crust, it possibly, and this isn't necessarily proven, may cause some minor earthquakes. Now, it's just interesting, you know, looking at the royal family, and I would count myself really as a royalist. I do like the royal family, but in a sort of fuzzy sort of way, and I like Jacob Rees-Mogg in a similar way, but then that probably reflects the way I grew up in my life, and I've had dealings with these people, and I've always found them to be very, very pleasant and very good to deal with. But there's one important thing. When Jacob Rees-Mogg says, well, I wouldn't mind fracking outside my home, of course, if it went wrong and all the water table and the water supplies destroyed the property, or the value of the property, or the habitable, what is the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm looking for, Michelle? Habitability? I think there might be one extra syllable in that, but you can correct me down below. But when it destroys the ability for them to live in their country pile down in the West Country of England, what will happen is the family around them, the wealth, the dignitaries, the royals, the controlling sort of people of the world will come up, and Jacob would just move his family to sort of Devon or another part of Cornwall, to another country pile, or it's the same with the royals in many ways. If there was a tsunami that swept across the whole of the United Kingdom, literally the world's biggest tsunami just swept across the United Kingdom and completely flattened the whole country down, the royal family, almost like cockroaches, would come out of it all and just move to another country estate. They just go up to Balmoral Castle, or they go to a different castle somewhere whilst everything got cleaned up and was but right for them. But you see, for a lot of families, if you've just really struggled through the generations and you've just come up to the point where you can afford to buy your first little house, maybe a little semi-detached house in the north of England, and your family have never had, you maybe been coal miners, or you've come from sort of very working class backgrounds, and you've got this little house, you've invested everything into it so that your children, not your school children, can go to a good school and get an education, and then suddenly that's taken away by something like the side effects from fracking, or a tsunami, for example, or some natural disaster. Well, of course, Uncle Jonty Snodgrass won't come from somewhere and give you another little house. You will be finished. Your dream, the family's dream to sort of drag themselves up by the bootstraps, will be finished. If that property becomes null and void, there isn't going to be a bank there that's going to sort of bail you out. You are going to be completely wrecked. You won't be able to move house easily. You won't be able to sell that property. So when Jacob and a lot of people, a lot of politicians and people of great privilege talk about these things, fracking and whether we should have it, and don't get me wrong, I've not got a strong opinion, although I do fully understand fracking. I've not got a strong opinion either way, because I don't know enough about it. But I'm sure when they just sort of say, well, I wouldn't mind if it was in my backyard, just to sort of virtue signal the fact that they could easily, put up with a nuclear power plant near their home, or fracking near their home, that they have this amazing golden parachute which looks after them from sort of cradle to grave. I mean, I've always said I love the royal family, but they've never needed anything throughout their lives. They've never wanted for anything. They've never needed to decide whether they can afford foie gras or to fly first class, and it would never happen. They never need to be troubled for a roof over their head if a disaster happened, like Buckingham Palace had a fire or something. It's not as if they'd be homeless. They'd certainly just move to another castle, or a beautiful apartment in the centre of London or New York or Tokyo, wherever they want to be, because they've never wanted for anything. Now, I know the Queen worked very hard, and God rest her soul, now she's no longer with us, and we have King Charles, or we will have King Charles very soon. It is important to remember, whatever these people say, that they will never want for anything. From children, they have their backsides cleaned, to their old age, they'll always, it doesn't matter how hard they work or perceive to work, they'll never want for anything. Imagine, put yourself in their position. For example, I want a Porsche, I can have a Porsche. I want a Rolls Royce, I can have a Rolls Royce. I want a yacht, I can have a yacht. I want to fly around the world 15 times a year, first class, in my own private jet. You can have it. Imagine living that lifestyle. There's no real reason why we should complain. Anyway, back to what I was saying about Jacob. He's got a new show on GB News, and I'm good I'm happy to see his face back on there. I think he's a good politician, but I do think that sometimes they don't realise just how blessed they are. I'd love to hear your comments about that. And yeah, these talks will be fairly random about different things. I had a couple of other ideas today, and I might actually give you a little sneak. I might talk about some privileged people I've known over the years and give you some little stories, some very fascinating little stories about some lords and ladies that I've met over the years, and whether to keep their names real or to use pseudonyms, I'm not sure. But anyway, keep them peeled for those stories. Love to you all. Love to know what you're thinking about this little series. Be good. And sorry to those where I put up the 7-Eleven video the other day and you left comments. Hopefully we're back in kilter now. Take care.